Welcome to my channel. 5 Deadliest Wars of the 21st Century. Second Congo War, 1998-2003. The struggle that began in the 20th century was by far the deadliest war of the 21st. Due to its size and devastation, the Second Congo War, also known as the Great War in Africa or Africa's First World War, was directly influenced by the Rwandan genocide, Mobutu Sese Seko's overthrow and death, an ethnic conflict between the Hutu and Tutsi peoples. Zaire was renamed the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, after rebel leader Laurent Kabila overthrew Mobutu in May 1997. However, he quickly found himself embroiled in a civil war with some of the forces that had propelled him to power. Similar to how the Western Front in World War I had been, the eastern portion of the Democratic Republic of the Congo developed to become a battlefield. The military forces of 9 nations and a variety of associated militias wreaked havoc on the countryside. The soldiers of Kabila's Congolese government were assisted by Angola, Namibia, Chad, Sudan, and Zimbabwe, while the rebels were backed by Burundi, Rwanda, and Ugandan forces. As organized warfare between professional armies gave way to brigandage and looting, there were reports of mass rapes in regions of conflict and significant resource depletion in the DRC. An estimated 3 million people, mostly civilians, died as a result of the conflict from fighting-related deaths as Syrian Civil War. The autocratic regimes of Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Yemen were overthrown by public upheavals as the Arab Spring spread through the Middle East and North Africa. President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, on the other hand, responded to protests, thereby unleashing violence against his own people while also making political compromises. The rebellion devolved into a civil war, which brought violence into the neighboring country of Iraq and served as a haven for extremist organizations like the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, commonly known as ISIS. Huge swaths of the country were taken over by rebel factions, and the region under government control was reduced to a little patch of land in western Syria. In an effort to keep his grip on power, Assad resorted to increasingly barbaric and desperate means, dropping crude barrel bombs on urban populations and employing chemical weapons on rebel-held territory. It looked obvious that Assad would be removed from office as regional states and Western nations became more involved in the crisis. In addition to conducting airstrikes against ISIL militants in both Syria and Iraq, Kurdish militias advanced from the Kurdish Autonomous Zone in northern Iraq. Russia, a steadfast ally of the Assad government, started a bombing campaign in support of Syrian government forces in 2015, turning the tide of the conflict. Iraq War. Prior to the events of September 11, 2001, neoconservative officials in the George W. Bush administration had sought to overthrow Saddam Hussein's government in Iraq, but the deadliest terrorist attack in American history would serve as, at least in part, the casus belli for the Iraq War. The United States formed a coalition of the willing and attacked Iraq on March 20, 2003, citing ties between the Iraqi government and al-Qaeda as well as the presence of WMDs there, claims that were later shown to be untrue. The ensuing conflict developed in 2 distinct phases. A brief conventional war with one side. Conflict that followed took place in 2 separate phases. A brief conventional war that was won by one side, in which coalition forces lost less than 200 personnel in just over a month of heavy combat operations, and an insurgency that lasted for years and resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of people. More than 4,700 coalition soldiers had died by the time U.S. combat forces withdrew in August 2010. At least 85,000 Iraqi civilians had also perished, though some estimates place that number significantly higher. The Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, also known as ISIS, a Sunni organization that wanted to establish a caliphate in Iraq and the Levant, was born out of the sectarian warfare that ravaged the nation after Hussein's Ba'athist dictatorship was overthrown Syria. More than 50,000 additional people were killed by ISIL or in battles between ISIL and Iraqi government forces between 2013 and the end of 2016. Afghanistan War. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, the United States started conducting airstrikes against the Taliban government in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda and its commander, Osama bin Laden, found refuge with the Taliban, an ultra-conservative Islamist group that took control of Afghanistan when the Soviet Union withdrew. For a while, the war on terrorism, led by the United States, was most visibly manifested in the conflict in Afghanistan. Although the Taliban were driven from power by December 2001, they would regain momentum in the tribal regions that lie on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The Taliban successfully started using improvised explosive devices, IEDs, on military and civilian targets after adapting their strategies to match those of the militants in Iraq. In the territories it governed, the Taliban increased opium growing, and a large portion of its terrorist and military endeavors were financed by the worldwide opium trade. An estimated 30,000 Afghan soldiers, police, and 31,000 Afghan civilians were killed between 2001 and 2016. During that time, the coalition commanded by NATO lost more than 3,500 soldiers, with fatalities coming from 29 different nations. The Pakistani Taliban also the war against Boko Haram. The intention behind the founding of the Islamist militant group Boko Haram, whose name in Hausa means "westernization is sacrilege," was to impose Sharia, Islamic law, on Nigeria. The organization was not well known until 2009, when it began a string of raids that resulted in the deaths of numerous police officers. In retaliation, the Nigerian government launched a military operation that resulted in the deaths of over 700 Boko Haram fighters. The remainder of Boko Haram was then fueled by a series of extrajudicial killings carried out by the Nigerian military and police. Boko Haram retaliated starting in 2010, killing police personnel, carrying out jailbreaks, and targeting civilian targets all over Nigeria. Northeastern schools and Christian churches were particularly brutally affected, and the 2014 kidnapping of almost 300 schoolgirls garnered international outrage. The nature of the battle changed from a terrorist campaign to a full-fledged insurgency that evoked the deadly Nigerian Civil War as Boko Haram started to exert control over more territory. Following Boko Haram raids that completely destroyed cities, troops from Cameroon, Chad, Benin, and Niger eventually joined the military response. By the end of 2016, Boko Haram's influence over the region had drastically diminished, but it still had the capability to conduct lethal suicide assaults. Boko Haram killed at least 11,000 civilians, and the fighting forced more than 2 million. These 5 deadliest wars of the 21st century serve as stark reminders of the enduring nature of conflict in our world. As we explore each of these conflicts, it's crucial to remember the countless lives affected and the urgent need for peace and diplomacy. Please like and subscribe for more thought-provoking content on animated history.